Looks like it's 7 o'clock. So evening, morning, afternoon, wherever you are around the world. This is the EMEA vBrownbag with myself, Greg Robertson. Tonight we have the authors of the Art of IT Infrastructure Design book. We have John Arrasjid, Mark Gabryjelski, and then later on, once he gets off the flight, Chris McCain is going to join us. The guys were very gracious to come on and talk about their new book. I've been very fortunate to be asked to do a review on it, and it's a really, really great book. So I asked the guys if they were willing to talk about the book, and they were, which is brilliant. If you are on the call, please use the hashtag vBrownbag if you have any questions. If you want to ask any questions, raise your hand, and I'll unmute you, because we mute all attendees by default, so we don't have to hear your dog barking in the background. Hopefully you really enjoy the whole presentation, what the guys have to offer. Hopefully you'll be purchasing the book once it comes out. Even if you're listening to this in a recording, we always appreciate feedback. I'm sure the guys writing or authoring the book will enjoy feedback about this also. For those on the call, this is being recorded, so you can watch it later on. So I think I've already given access to you, John, so the floor is yours.
Sounds good. Hey, thank you guys, Greg and Renee and all the other team from vBrownbag, both US and for EMEA. This is the first opportunity that Mark and I have had to speak on one of these calls, and we definitely hope we'll give you some feedback and possibly some follow-on things that we have going in maybe future vMUG sessions. But first, what I want to do is just give you some quick introductions. My background is many of you may know me from the VMware space, where I worked for about 12 years. A lot of work on the VCDX program from the very early days, but also doing work on consulting, architecture design, managed services, cloud services, and the most recent part that I finished off on was in the education space before I moved on to the CTO office over at EMC. I'll let Mark go ahead and give you a quick rundown on his background.
And this is Mark Gabryjelski, and some of you have seen me at different user groups or VMworld and even Partners Exchange. Spent a lot of time and trying to enable others and make other people's lives easier. Been focused in IT for the last 20 years, mostly on the reseller side and the integration and consulting side of things. So if there's a technology from servers and storage to networking, I've had a chance to play with it over the years, and I consider myself very lucky to have played in so many technologies. And now my newest projects are I've been working with John on getting some books authored and finding ways to make people's lives easier again going forward, just using a different avenue.
Yeah. Cool. And Chris McCain, like I said, is on a flight. He's going to join us as soon as he gets out of the plane, which is probably about another 10 or 15 minutes. But I'll give you his quick background. He has run independent training groups in the past before coming on to VMware, in particular for the NSX team, with a focus on technical certification for that area. So bringing his education background as well as his double VCDX. I don't think he got his third one yet, but I know he's on track for it if he hasn't already. So the three of us have gotten together. I've been working on a lot of this methodology material to go above and beyond just what's in the VCDX program, to kind of take it a little bit further and kind of think of how can we train people. And thanks to my good friend Mark here, who's also an early VCDX, we came together with an idea to move forward on developing a book that can be used as a resource, but it can also be used for training material. And we're going to talk about that in just a second here. First thing, I wanted to quote this one person that I have met virtually through LinkedIn and Twitter. I believe he's based out of India, but he may be in the U.S. Right now. But he says, people don't use a product because of the great design, great design helps them use the product. And this is one of the things that we can come up with a lot of very good cliches to help people understand what's important. And the thing is, don't focus only on the technology. Think about the business needs, think about the business process, and think about the operations as well. And this covers whether you're doing virtualization for servers or desktop, for cloud, and now we're talking about all the software-defined areas, as well as converged infrastructure in support of that. So here is the list that we have for our audience: aspiring architects, candidates who are looking at achieving IT architect level or systems engineering type of certifications or degrees. We also look at existing architects because there are currently, and there have been in the past, other certifications, not just the VCDX program. And the reason why I bring that up is people may cross many areas. We have some people who have the Cisco Certified Architect certification that may be on the call. We have people from the Microsoft space or some other areas. So these are things that we've included, or I should say, we are about to tell you about the things that we're including that can actually help you, some additional tools that you might find beneficial. The other thing is looking at system administrators, and I think Mark will talk a little bit to this space. For system administrators and IT project managers, in many cases, some of these individuals either come from the design space or maybe looking at going to the design area. Mark, you had mentioned something about that on some of the things to think about as you go from system administration to architecture. I didn't know if you want to interject any on that space.
Absolutely, and you know, one of the biggest challenges that people have is you know, making changes happen in their lives. And when you go from system administration and owning part of a solution, be it, you know, an Exchange environment, an Active Directory environment, or, you know, if we're like a lot of folks where we own the entire aspect of it, where we own everything and have some level of responsibility for all aspects of the data center. When you start thinking and changing your career to designing those solutions to make things easier, system administrator has a lot of great insights into how to keep things simple. And, you know, that's great. And then there's the consumption of technology that goes around it and building a solution that's easy to maintain and monitor and update. And one of the things I love to bring up, I think Chris McCain said it best back in VMworld, and I've been using it ever since. He said, never implement technology for technology's sake. Always make sure there's a requirement for it. And, you know, that was great words of wisdom out of Chris McCain from that session, and it still holds to me, you know, 9 months later. What this book will hopefully do is to force you as an administrator moving to an architect role to understand some of the concepts and the key areas of design. We'll be providing some examples of how we would approach design, but then we'll also challenge you to go ahead and think about the solution in changing critical areas such as networking or back-end storage and how that might impact your design. So teaching you to move from that maintaining type of mindset to that forward-thinking type of mindset where you're trying to address problems, issues, and maintenance headaches before they occur so you can make someone else's life easier as they own the solution that you've designed.
Yep, and one of the things that Mark and I have talked a lot about, as well as other people who have achieved VCDX, not just the panelists, but candidates who've gone through, whether or not they're successful, but the feedback is, how do I understand what are the areas that are important from the VCDX program, but also from a customer's perspective. And we always look at the business drivers. And so that's one of the things that we do as part of the book. What I wanted to do is give you a little bit of a lay, I should say, the lay of the land on how the book is laid out. We've only got a couple more slides just to give you the background, so in preparation for some of the Q&A. But the introduction, fortunately, I've had the pleasure to have Pat Gelsinger do a second forward. So he's writing a forward for this book as he did before in the vCloud Architecture Toolkit book. But the idea here is set the stage, and in here we've actually included quotes from a lot of different architects. Majority of them are VCDX. But part of this is to actually show you not just a list of quotes that may look the same, but more of how much do people in the architecture field think about different things that drive infrastructure design. And then we get into the methodology. So there was a lot of research done by VMware Press and by Pearson, who actually is the backing publisher for the VMware Press series. What they said is they're not finding a lot of books that cover the methodology, although it is a sampling across a lot of the different books that talk about developing a particular product, but many of them are very vendor specific. Although we have examples on VMware technology, the idea is to take a vendor agnostic approach on the infrastructure design methodology. So you'll notice it won't have a direct tie as far as the wording goes to the VCDX Bootcamp book that's already out. It actually takes it from a more vendor agnostic standpoint. But we have to give examples of the physical architecture at some point, and that's where we need to pick up particular vendors. We chose the ones that we're familiar with. And in the examples, we have a case study that sets the stage for a customer that wants to do both server virtualization and desktop virtualization. And for those that are on the call that are in the education or training space, you'll like this approach that we actually put into the server design example. Chris McCain worked on this section in particular for developing a lab to help people do training. So this is actually something that people could use to build their own training environment as well to help them with what they're doing. But here's the one thing that you'll find. We've got the design example, which includes the server virtualization, conceptual, logical, and physical design components. The next section is the set of supporting documents that go around the architecture design. This is operations, implementation details, validation or a test plan suite, things like that are those supporting documents. And Mark worked very hard on this to make sure that this could be applied not just on the Chapter 4, but extended beyond to other areas, including like the desktop virtualization space, which in this case, we only give the design example. We leave it as an exercise for people to add the supporting documents. We figured the two design examples are going to be unique enough that we wanted to have those complete. From the standpoint of the supporting documents, we thought we'd give some flexibility here and have some generic aspects to it to give people an idea of what they might want to include. And I'll let Mark talk a little bit more about that. Yeah.
So, John, you give me a little too much credit on the supporting documents for the server virtualization piece. I know we worked hard on it collaboratively. So I think one of the best parts about that chapter is we went through and we painstakingly tried to keep things as simple as possible to provide people a framework for how to go ahead and create their own set of documents. And we took some of the most basic components, setting up an ESX server, staging up a vCenter server, building out a VMware cluster and dictating HA cluster settings as well as DRS cluster settings, and left it as a we've actually created the entire process document so that you'll see that we have quite a bit there, and it seems relatively simple to go out and just install an ESX server, but if you actually consider all the different things that you have to deal with, not only simple things like IP address and which version that you need and what the hardware, firmware you would need to have that supported, but also things like an ESX dump address, path selection policies, and any SATP settings that need to be addressed for your storage to make life easier as you consume this for day-to-day operations. You know, providing that framework gives you the ability to review your own set of documents and build sheets, and go ahead and update that and make not only your life easier, but the rest of your team that you work with make their lives easier.
One thing that I was going to say is on this here gives content based on a particular use case or set of use cases in the case study, but the ordering of the document gives you an idea of one way you might go from start to finish in the document creation.
So, John, you bring up one way, and I think that's going to be key. Is even while we're writing this, you'll see server virtualization and desktop virtualization. We specifically wrote those chapters with two different authors. And focused on letting those authors let their personalities come through in those designs. Not because we wanted to lighten the workload, that was a side benefit, but because now we can show that there are different ways to approach a design and still accomplish the same results, as long as you can meet some of the requirements and the layout that we've defined in the case study and the infrastructure design methodology. There's not only one way to skin this cat, so to say.
And actually, that leads into this next area. This is the last chapter that we're working on that's titled Design Analysis. And what we try to do is show in the examples not a set of reference architectures. Although they could be used as a starting point, the idea is let's show both strengths and weaknesses in design and have this other chapter, design analysis, talk about those strengths and weaknesses, talk about alternative options and the reasons why certain choices might have been made. And we've gone through, and we're just about finished with the review of the chapters on the examples. The design analysis is one of the last chapters to go through because we wanted to see, before we started filling it out, what did people find as strong and weak points. So for those of you who are reviewers on here, which includes Renee and Greg and a few others, we'll have some feedback that you may provide that may not be changed in the example documents, but called out in the design analysis. We thought that would actually be better than just trying to come up with exactly reference architectures. The other main chapter is called Presenting and Defending the Design. So we actually have in the VCDX Bootcamp book information on this specifically for VCDX. In this area, we talk about some of the strategies on developing the presentation, the approach to doing a defense of the design. And a defense doesn't mean it's just for certification. It also means for a customer, because the customer is going to pay you or not pay you, depending on whether you meet their requirements. So that's one that's actually going out for review very shortly. I believe we're going to have that out in the next day or so. And then we also are in the final stage for the last review of these four, I'll call them tools chapters or tools appendices. The first one is Discovery Phase Survey, an example of the types of questions that might be asked during what's called the discovery phase. This is where you develop your conceptual architecture and think about, hey, based on these sets of requirements, how does this design consideration need to be thought about? And what are the design patterns we're going to choose? What is the path that we take and how are we going to handle it? There's then the Design Decision Workbook. Some of you may have seen this as I've had other versions of this workbook used for doing different design workshops for Site Recovery Manager, vSphere, vCloud, several other areas through partner exchange events. And then we have this third appendix that has another tool called the Design Review Readiness Assessment. These are like some checks that you can run through to say, hey, is my design ready? Have I considered these particular areas? It's not that you have to or not, sorry, you don't have to necessarily choose to include all of the areas that are showing in there, but you may want to use this to see if you're missing any items. Or also, if there are specific things that you're presenting on that maybe you're not the expert on, how do you think about, how do you come up to speed on that area, say if you're in a team of maybe 3 designers, 3 architects, and how do you make sure that you can be the one person to represent that whole team? The last appendix that we have is one that Mark's been working on for a while that we've included in here. It's building a design lab. And since that's the last piece on the appendix, and I'm sure Mark has a few other comments on the other sections, I'll let him go ahead and give a little bit more feedback on those areas.
So yeah, I wanted to compliment or add to the comment you made on presenting and defending the design. You know, a lot of us work as architects. We work for resellers or large companies where we engage with customers, where we actually go out and implement this for a customer. That chapter really is focused on those folks as well as architects that are inside of any organization where you build and present the design. At some point, you have to present your design, your goals, to someone, whether it's your upstream management, whether it's to another business group, or if you work for a large company like EMC or a reseller like mine at WEI, you sell it to a customer who you will then go and implement it in some professional services type of manner. So I love the way that we're working through that chapter and making it applicable to not only architects that face customers, but architects that face internal customers as well. And John did a really good job covering most of the appendices. I just wanted to elaborate a little bit on Appendix D. And you know, when I wrote this, I was really taking into account the considerations that I had when I was starting out and building my own home lab. And my biggest constraint back then was I had no money. So I was, everyone struggles at the beginning of their career. I really worked to build out a design lab that people could take advantage of. Layer 2, Layer 3 networking, LACP, VLANs, routes, and things. Have an ESX server, be able to build virtual ESX servers, play with all of the advanced distributed virtual switch settings, and do so to try to bring that in at a reasonable dollar value. And I think we came out at around $2,000 for a full-blown home lab. Now that doesn't mean you only have to spend $2,000. I tried really hard to make sure that it was accessible to almost anyone who wanted to jump into this. There are some folks, Michael Webster has one of the most impressive home labs I've ever seen. And he gets to update that while he flies around using his VDI solution and in-flight Wi-Fi. I personally don't even have that same high-end lab. I actually run the home lab that I talk about here in the Appendix D at my house to still do a lot of my testing of the different products and whatnot. So still very useful, and it gives you a good guideline if you're not exactly sure how to get started and what you would need to put together that lab and actually empower yourself to start learning at home.
Yeah, cool. Now, I did want to give an example, as people have asked in many cases when I've done the VCDX boot camps in the past, how do I think about what to include in a design document? And the thing is, there are many things you can include in it, but you have to have certain fundamental areas. This is an example of just one of the documents in the document set. This is what we're calling the Architecture Design Table of Contents. And in here, you can see the breakdown. We've got conceptual, logical, physical. We've got the different areas that we look at from the standpoint of resources, things like the hardware design, the network storage design, virtual machine design. But this is only one of several. The other ones would be operations, validation, and several of the other documents that I described before. The other thing you'll notice here is, and we've done this in the book, where there are italic or highlighted items, these are specifically VMware technologies. So if you're doing design for VMware, you can go ahead and use that. But if you're doing design for another area, another technology for cloud, for virtualization, another hypervisor, for example, it gives you the flexibility to think about how that might fit in and how you might slot it in those areas that we've highlighted.
And John, to elaborate on that a little more, I mean, you could take a lot of those same fundamentals that we described here as hypervisor related, and you could look at this entire table of contents and apply this to application deployment. And justifying availability and all the components that you touch for deploying applications.
Yeah, in the top right where we've got virtual machine design, I can see that happening in the future. Things like technologies from companies like Docker, what was in Greek computing with Sun Microsystems, and some of the other technologies that are out there may be yet another area that you'll see change when we actually focus more on the applications as individual units or components versus the virtual machines that carry those applications. This is something that I think is coming. I think we see it today already, but it may not be the first thing that many system administrators think about because they're dealing with the infrastructure, but I think we're going to see more with this whole concept of DevOps and SRE, site reliability engineers, this concept of focusing on the application first and foremost, and having, instead of trying to fit a square peg in a round hole, how do we make sure that both the infrastructure and the app people work together? And I'm sure you probably have a few more to add on that, definitely on the desktop side as well.
Yeah, so we could elaborate on that dramatically, but we're running up to a half hour.
Yep. That takes us right into the time, so we can pass it back for, how do I do this? How do I pass it back so we can go ahead and let you guys take control? The Q&A section. Mike for Michael and Renee, I guess, or Greg.
So, Greg, you ready?
Yeah, I mean, Renee, if you want to ask your questions, you had more questions than me, so you can
Yep, okay, happy for me to. So I suppose the first question is, when you look at, I know you guys have worked as panelists and you've reviewed a lot of designs as well as building the content for your book. So what are the most common mistakes that you see architects making when they do their first designs.
So Mark, I'll let you go ahead and go first. Maybe we'll just alternate on the question. Do you want to do that?
Sure. Absolutely. So, common mistakes, I mean, there's lots. And I just look back at the mistakes that I made going back. And John and I have talked about this, as this was one of the concepts we thought about as writing this. And when I started doing designs, I really focused on the coolest and newest technologies that needed to get rolled out. I wasn't able to understand that it was all about what the business required and what the business needed to have rolled out. So I would go right to the hardware, and I would look for the fastest chipset, and that was right where I started. I never even thought to consider asking the business what they needed for performance, what they needed to do for a backup window or a recovery plan, or how their backups or other operations might impact the solution that we were talking about. It was right about hardware and technology and taking advantage of the newest and greatest thing. I mentioned earlier something that I learned from Chris McCain. Don't implement technology for technology's sake. There's another one that starts off with from Nutanix, which is complex is confident and simple can be genius. Because if you keep things simple, we've all heard the acronym in some form or other to keep it simple. And I think people tend to overcomplicate designs that don't meet any business requirements. Keeping it simple really ends up being the best way to take advantage of things and simplify a lot of problems. And the only reason you would do something in a design is to meet a business requirement.
Well, and to that point, one of the things is when you talked about the technology aspect, this is one of the things that I've also seen is many of the individuals who are challenged during a VCDX defense or challenged when they present a design is the focus on the actual infrastructure components and not on the operational aspects. Operations are just as important. Even if you think you have the best design in the world, if it can't be implemented, or there will be challenges with the implementation, or it's not future-proof for updates down the road, that will definitely cause a challenge. So I think we hit quite a few there. So hopefully that gives some good insight for the attendees.
Yeah, and just you mentioning that the operation of the solution. So obviously the supporting documentation of an architecture design is also very important. Just want to quickly talk about that as well, the importance of that.
Yeah, the thing is the design components, the documentation, one of the things that I've seen, and this is not revealing any secrets or anything, but many people who work at a partner of VMware and are doing the VCDX certification. This would apply also to Microsoft or other companies as well, may be very familiar with how things are done based on the consulting set of templates that you might use as a starting point. Using templates can be good and bad. If you have a template and you just fill in some information, that doesn't quite work. That's one of the reasons why in the book we're actually giving you full design examples to see the context, and then you can make your own templates from that if you want to. But the key is a customer may have the skills necessary to implement something without detailed guidance. But every customer is a little bit different, and there are custom ways for a business to implement certain solutions based on hardware, based on add-in software, for example, integrating with existing monitoring tools or automation tools. The documentation is really key, and that's the reason why when we look at things like on the VCDX program, I use that as a comparison because that's the one that people know me for the most. We look at the design, we look at how things are put together, how they actually don't just do generic information in the document or refer to the manuals. This is where they customize the details to the customer specifications, whether they're detailed specs or not as detailed specs. But they're very important. Just turning over the architecture design without those supporting documents leads to potential challenges later on.
John, I'd love to compliment that with I never really saw a lot of value in that when I was starting out in the supporting documentation, but it became more apparent the longer I stayed in the IT industry. Today, I can't go without having any of those operational guides. And you know, the best compliment I get, and you never really see the benefit of it until you get this compliment from the team that you work with, is that they would go back and reference those documents, and they had to rebuild something. And they were able to go ahead and rebuild a solution or a component of a solution, and they referenced your documents, and everything was absolutely spelled out and accurate there. And it made it possible for them to go ahead and react and bring a solution back online or repair something that was causing them pain. And they didn't have to suffer or struggle, and they got it right the first time. So the first time you see that benefit is, I mean, you'll smile and you'll look back and you'll start to see and realize that benefit. It's really cool when that happens to you the first time.
Yep, sounds good. So for people who are budding architects, so let's say they're working in an operator or administrator role, so this book will help non-architects start to build their architect skills. And what are some of the recommendations that you have for non-architects to become an architect?
Mark, do you mind if I go first on this? There's a couple of things that I wanted to pull up. Okay, for specific roles that people have. So existing architects and aspiring architects, this can be a reference guide and a training guide for areas to expand beyond maybe where their course area is, and I think that's probably pretty straightforward and given. But the other areas, like administrators and IT project managers, they may want to choose to go into design, but it could also be for another reason to be successful in the role they have already. And this is where understanding methodology that may be used to actually come up with design considerations, the choices that you make for those considerations, and then how do you meet the requirements, the design patterns. Those are areas that I think are very important. And also for the project managers to understand the scope of effort, the scope of work that might be required. We don't call out specifically how much time that it will take to create a design document. Although now maybe we'll put in the example that some people have provided of, hey, you know, we do a design, it's a minimum of 300-something hours for ones that are for a large enterprise. That's one example. We don't put the numbers in right now into the book for one key reason. Every project is going to be different, and whatever number we put in is going to cover just one subset of all these different projects. Mark, did you want to add?
You know, as you're moving from the system admin role and you're moving up to the design aspect of things and wanting to become and you're an aspiring architect at that point, there are lots of different areas that you have to go ahead and approach, and you have to leave your comfort zone. I think one of the things that will help above and beyond the chapters that kind of show how a design is written and put together on the front end. In the back end of the book, we have a lot of exercises that cover things particular to infrastructure, vSphere infrastructure, and all the things that it touches: backup, antivirus, certificate management, Active Directory, how DNS and DHCP and NTP are core components of that. And it's not so much to give you an education in those different subsets of technologies like DNS, but to show you how all these things have interdependencies and intertwine, and how it's not about a technology. It's about how your technology and your solution impacts the rest of the environment and the rest of the infrastructure. So if you're an admin, you're really going to all of a sudden have a different view of how your job might be as you're going through your journey to becoming an architect.
So I'm glad you brought that up, because one of the things that I would recommend, and this is something that I've seen with many candidates who are successful that are coming from an admin background moving into architecture, and that is look at the existing infrastructure that your company has to whatever means you have available to you to view the different components. Think about using that to develop or reverse engineer the design and create a design document that would match. And the reason for doing that is you'll learn a lot of things about why some decisions are made. There could be technical reasons, there could be business reasons, there could be financial reasons, there could be timing reasons. There's so many things that can drive that. If you actually do a reverse engineer of an existing design, you'll learn a lot. But the thing is, don't stop there. See if you can find who architected that and ask them for details or to confirm what you believe were the reasons for creating that design. Sorry. There we go.
Yep. And also it's worth calling out some of the V community events that are going on, like there's the Virtual Design Master competition, which is about to go into Season 3 as well, which is quite a fun way for people to cut the teeth on architecture design.
I highly endorse that one. It's great. This is something that I think is kind of, it's the Olympics for infrastructure design, I think. Maybe I'm making it too big, but you know, the idea here is it's a really fun competition.
And you know what?
Yeah.
When you start going to the user groups, the VMware user groups, the VMworld events, or any of those events, you'll start to see that challenge has brought a lot of people together, and I mean, their whole evenings centered around that contest and that challenge.
Yeah. Are we able to talk about? Sorry, Greg, I just interrupted you, mate.
That's all right. No, I was going to ask a question quickly. I kind of know the answer to this, but some people might ask it. If they read the book from start to finish, do you think then they will be prepared to attempt the VCDX?
The one thing that the book gives is a background, examples, and some tools, but until they actually build a design and go through some peer review, this is before they do the defense, they may or may not be ready. It's hard to actually give you a direct answer. I think they have to go through the exercise of a design and actually get some peer review, especially in the areas that maybe they're weak on. Like for me, I have certain areas that I have strengths on. The areas that I'm weak on, I try to find other people to poke holes in anything that I have to make sure that I didn't miss something. Basically have that peer review, or part of the team is the way we would do it in production, for example.
Yeah, I guess I understand what you're saying. It's almost coming in down into the T-skilling ideas that even though for the BCDX you're meant to be really, really good at VMware stuff, you also have to understanding of the network, the storage, and all the other pillars.
Yeah, exactly. You know, one thing that's interesting, in the concept of doing the VCDX defense, or certain other defenses that follow the same approach where you have to submit a design, the reason why we did what we did in our examples was to give people a starting point, something that has all of the pieces of information that would get accepted based on the quality of the design. Even though there may be some weaknesses in there, the idea is it would pass what they call the minimally qualified candidate level. And the thing then is, once you can get that design done, the next step is being able to present it and actually respond to questions based on what you've submitted.
Yeah,
so
sorry, Mark, keep on going.
All right. One of the things I see, I mean, reading the book doesn't guarantee you passing a VCDX defense. It definitely can show you the things that, you know, in this case, 3 of us have gone through and brought together to, and John called it out perfectly. It's that minimally qualified candidate. What you actually need to put into your design to get its invited to go and submit for a defense. I wish you could go ahead and put like a timer on it. Like after 3 years in IT, you'd be ready for this. You know, you have to. I think you really have to have a passion in IT. You know, you really want to go forward with it. I think with the information that this book will have, can go ahead and provide you a starting point if you're looking to go ahead and start a design. If you have a design that you've created, it can give you some validation, or at least make you rethink how you approach some of the sections of the presentation of your material. Maybe that you found that you missed something. So it should add, you know, it can give people a starting point or provide some validation for how they're going through it. And those dependencies towards the back that we've been working on, I think that those give some of the Q&A that you need. John mentioned the first one is the discovery questions, things that you engage with the customer. You know, that's a lot of good information. I mean, simple things that we take for granted and are overlooked should always be asked. You know, making an assumption is, you know, the mother of all mistakes, right? You know, however you want to phrase that. But I think that this gives people a great foundation and gives them a validation area to measure themselves against. And then we also have the presenting the design chapter. You know, it's one way to go ahead and make sure that you're confident and comfortable doing the presentation of your material and how, you know, what is part of your design when it comes time to stand up and do a defense, be it for the VCDX board or be it for your next customer visit.
So you do have a chapter that covers some of the soft skills, which are often overlooked by budding architects.
Yes.
Yes, absolutely.
Right.
Strengths and weaknesses on it. It's not about necessarily how you dress. It's how you address the questions and present in a way that's clear, concise, and basically helps with a flow going from start to finish. I mean, that's something that that we looked at. The example presentation that we include for a defense is based on the material that we provide as examples, so people can tie back into what the actual document says versus what the presentation has.
Yeah. I know for VCDX candidates in particular, one of the hardest things that it is to master is that confidence that when you walk in front of the panelists that you're talking to equals and not talking to people who have a higher skill level than you. It's like a switch that you need to flick in your head. I know for me it was tough first time round, but second time round, once I had that, it made a big difference.
It's one of the reasons why the program has 3 panelists. I'm not sure if everyone knows the history, but when I did it, there were 7 panelists, and the reason why we did that was we wanted to make sure that our evaluation cut out extremes on evaluation, and we actually use that to help you formulate what the right scoring mechanism was, and that is listen, see if the individual responds to the feedback and the questions that are asked by the panelists. In fact, to the point of we can't tell them whether they're right or wrong, but by asking a certain question, somebody with an architect skill may find that as useful to understand follow-on questions to ask back to the panel.
And you know, I was meeting with Chris Colati at one of the user groups here in New England. Chris is now the evangelist for the VCDX program, and he actually came up with a really good story. And it's the early VCDXs had it tough because there was very little knowledge about the program. There was no help. There were no books like this. There were no study groups or and any real knowledge or sharing in the community of the VCDX program. But today, he says that it seems as though the folks going through the VCDX have it tough now because now we know all the panelists, even though we have all this assistance. We recognize the panelists from their blogs and their speaking engagements and from participation inside the community, and we might be intimidated by that. But when you actually go in, I think you hit it perfectly as you described it. Is you're going in to be judged on the VCDX panel. You're being judged by your peers. They're regular people, and that fear doesn't need to be there. And I've heard that fear has caused a lot of people to be so intimidated during the first time they sat through a defense that they failed or they didn't do as well as they could. I wish we could go ahead and have that, but if you want to get over that fear, find us at a user group of we make ourselves readily available on Twitter, on the VMware communities or anywhere online, and we also make ourselves available in person at the users groups. Say hi. We're just people too.
Yeah, all very good. So when someone puts a design together, what are some of the tools that you guys have put together within your book that you recommend for measuring the effectiveness of a design? I think that's something that a lot of architects struggle with, at least for their first 1 or 2 designs. Is it good? Is it bad? What are some of the tools that we can use to measure that?
So I mentioned a couple here, and we'll go into a little bit more detail. The discovery phase survey questions are the starting point. How do you draw out some more feedback that will help you on doing the design? The design decision workbook, I think, is one of the key foundations. This is something that I've used even before I had joined VMware, where we look at all the things that we have to think about. What are the paths that we take to address those things that we're thinking about? So, for example, we have to deal with a particular governance, and maybe it's a regulatory compliance guideline that ties into security, which then impacts networking, storage, roles and access controls, things like that. And how do we actually migrate to the point where we can actually address those? I think this is an area Mark also has touched on in some of the areas in the specific design. I'm not sure if you want to cover that now. Do you want to do that, Mark?
So in the how do you measure success is that's always a touchy subject, and everyone can measure it differently. One of the I found that, and you can see it in the chapters and the examples that we've captured and put into the book, is I find that we can go ahead and measure success by meeting all of the requirements that a company requires or a customer would require as we go through and build the design. If we were to make it simple, if we were looking at doing a disaster recovery architecture for a customer, if they said they needed to be back up and running in 4 hours with a recovery point of 4 hours worth of potential data loss, if we can, that's just one of the potential requirements that might be part of that project. But if I can meet all of the all the requirements that the business provides, I definitely can use that as a great measurement of success. And that's why we focus so much on the front of these example chapters. You'll see it as we identify all of the business requirements going forward, and then we wrap up constraints, risks, and assumptions that we might have. And you'll hear those 4 terms pretty consistently in almost all of the architecture discussions that we have, is identifying the requirements, any constraints the customer imposes on you, any assumptions the customer or you as the architect might have, and then any of the risks that come up from any combination of those things.
And for those on the call, you can see this on the WebEx. 2 ways of looking at this. The Table 1 and Table 2 show both a little bit longer and a little bit shorter way of looking at design decision information. This is for traceability, and typically these decisions may be tracked. Maybe there's some numerical index for each of the design decisions that are in the material. So this is one of the tools. And a second tool that I wanted to show was the Design Review Readiness Assessment. So I'm not going to, let me just try to see if I can give you just one of the areas, because this is pretty long, but the idea here is documentation checklist. Have you hit the customer requirements in these 5 key areas? Solution architecture, same thing. Engineering specifications, details on that. So these are all items that you might want to consider as part of your checklist to give you an idea on completeness. Not necessarily on whether you've done it right or wrong, or if it's a great or a poor decision. This is just to give you an idea of things to think about as you go through and work on the design. So gives you a kind of a rough indicator of some of the things that we include.
Yeah, I know for me, one of my favorite tools that I've developed over time is what I call the solution metrics, where with the numerical numbering of everything, I have everything linked together and I put it into a spreadsheet. And then by looking for low numbers or blank cells, I can see where requirements or design decisions are not being met. And also counting up the number of design qualities, the number of design decisions that match design qualities. I can also see where the strength of the design is as well. So there's a lot of things that you can do for measuring your design effectiveness.
That's a really good strategy. One of the things that I have seen happen, being I guess I'll say in the audience, either for a defense or with a customer, is when somebody is asked, why did they do this one design choice? Why did they take this path? Why did they use a particular design pattern? And the person couldn't answer that. Whether you're doing a defense or you're working directly with the customer, it's really important to be able to respond to those and really understand what's going on. It's just the tools that you use to prepare for. The ones that we have here are one set of them, but I think there's going to be a lot more. That matrix you described, I think, would be another good one for people to look at. How do we make sure that the requirements do get met? How do you do the checklist? We actually covered in the book when we covered how do you track requirements, constraints, assumptions, and
yeah.
Slightly different format maybe, but I mean it's the right thing to do.
So we're on to the last few questions here that I have at least. So emerging technologies. So obviously we have converged infrastructure, hyper-converged infrastructure, the software-defined data center, et cetera, et cetera. How much do you touch on emerging technologies within your new book that's coming out?
Well, we are trying to be careful about how much we actually cover in the book. Obviously, we can't cover everything, but you'll see some aspects of software-defined networking as part of this, not necessarily NSX. That's something that we're looking at adding on as one of the follow-ons, the first follow-on to this, that Chris McCain is looking at expanding on. The designs that we have are pretty much fit in the software-defined data center construct, but it doesn't necessarily mean it maps any one vendor's definition of what should be included. So it's a good starting point, and with a big focus on the virtualization space. We need to touch cloud. We have Wade Holmes who come forward and said he'd like to do something on the hybrid cloud space. Chris McCain, as I said, on the software-defined networking. We've talked to Rawlinson Rivera, who's also interested in working on the software-defined storage. But we do think that as this goes forward, there may be individual authors or there may be groups of authors for each of these different areas. So think of us focusing on the methodology for design, but not going into the physical aspects except for the examples. Those would actually come when we actually give additional example designs and maybe the deep dive analysis. So the Chapter 7 is where you'll see a majority of the things where we talk about the software-defined this, software-defined that, so on. All these things like converged infrastructure, that is one area that we'll probably include as part of the Chapter 7, which is design analysis. Mark, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, so I mean, John, you kind of laid it out beautifully. As you can see, that this is going to become this series of all these different technologies that we can go ahead and apply. And I think that John was really had a really great idea when we started this project, which was to keep it simple and focus on two very core designs, and then that design analysis chapter we can go ahead and call out some of these additional potential areas like the hybrid cloud and software-defined networking and storage. So breaking out those other chapters can go, these other topics into additional components of this series really allows us to focus on the foundation of what makes a great design and allowing us to go ahead and discuss in a separate book or the different topics that kind of complement that or are additional technological components that we're going to include as part of our normal data center design.
It's actually interesting too. That question is actually really it hits home really closely, because we originally thought of server and desktop virtualization plus cloud, and we realized the length of the book and the scope of what we would be covering would be probably more than what we needed to get somebody started on being successful on architecture, and we felt that we would add that in later, like Mark was saying, to make sure that it could be one of many paths that people take from the intricacies of design. What are the things that you include in a particular infrastructure?
Yeah, I think your idea is genius. It's obviously for infrastructure architects in particular, there really is nothing out there, and that you guys are going to be setting the ground for a series of books, and this would be actually this is probably the second book, because you've got the VCDX Bootcamp book as well that really talks about the process of becoming a VCDX and what you need to do. It all just goes hand in hand.
Yep, exactly. They're designed to be complementary. We're trying not to duplicate anything that's in the VCDX Bootcamp book, but this book we're trying to stay, from the methodology standpoint and the tool standpoint, more vendor agnostic. And that gives the flexibility to work with other types of design courses, architecture courses, or even sessions that people might want to put together for cross-training. For example, when VMUGs get together and there are individuals working on the VCAP, the IX, or the VCGX certifications, what do they use as a resource? So this is one of those things that we're hoping will be a resource to help them move forward.
So Mark and John, in your opinion, so when you look at the current publication landscape, what are the go-to references and publications that you would recommend for architects out there who want to build their skills?
Well, there's one that we talked about earlier, Russ White's book on from the Cisco standpoint. That's definitely one that I think would complement. It's got more than just the networking side. It's got areas on the discovery phase all the way through to putting together the final solution. But there are other ones that that I think are valuable when we look at picking the technology to meet the requirements within the logical design. Map it. What are the physical entities? That's where we look at specific vendors. So if you're going to use VMware vSphere, pick your favorite version. I'll call it 5 point whatever right now. Most people will reference material around specific physical design decisions, and that's where those books become very valuable. The VMware Press series has a long list of well-established authors who also are technology experts, but you also find people that do self-publishing. So, for example, the work that Duncan Epping and Frank Denneman have done on HA and DRS and some of those areas, they did a lot of that through self-publishing. You don't have to necessarily go through a specific vendor to find, a publishing house to pick a particular book. To give you an idea, we have references that we are going to include in the book. I mentioned a few already, but all the things that are tied to certifications, all the books that are study guides, for example, for the design certifications, are examples like Paul McSherry's book on the DX side of design. Those are the areas that I think can actually help an individual on putting their design together and also understanding the intricacies. And in many cases, these books are now including not just the physical architecture, but the logical pieces as well.
I remember one of the first times I heard your name was watching a YouTube video, you talking about the vCloud Architecture Toolkit, which I know is your baby for a long time. That's also an excellent resource, I think.
It's coming back, by the way. Wade Holmes is leading the resurgence of that for the ISP space.
Yeah, that's great. Great to hear.
Yeah, so that's actually a good example of design decisions, the traceability, and how basically half of the people who worked on that book, or a little bit more than that, were VCDX and applied a lot of the VCDX principles to creating the design patterns that we included in there.
So you also mentioned user conferences. So we've all been to VMworld, etc. What are some of the architecture user conferences that people won't be aware of that are resources out there that they can attend and meet with like-minded people?
So I'll give a first stab and I'll let Mark jump in. The thing that I would look at are conferences tied to vMUG, vForum type of events where they bring in architects to talk about what they're working on, or having tutorials to help people understand what are some of those considerations you need to make. But there are also some other conferences as well. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with the term SRE, or Site Reliability Engineer, but there is a conference that got started last year between the Unix Association, which I'm on the board of directors for, and Google, which actually has changed or morphed some of the system administration titles into this Site Reliability Engineer, where they focus on how do we maximize performance, reliability, availability, and things like that. That's one where you can learn about both large-scale infrastructure design, but also applying it to some of the smaller infrastructures. There's also another conference that I've been going to for, well, a very long time. It's probably over a decade now, and it's called the Large Installation Sysadmin Conference, or LISA, which is part of the Unix Association. That is one of the areas where myself and other VCDXs have taught tutorials on designing for the networking side, for cloud, and for virtualization. But there are still many more that are out there. I may not have a full list right off the top of my head, but many of them are tied to either vendors or Unix, ACM, or IEEE organizations. Mark, did you want to have others that you're familiar with that might be?
You know, you've covered it pretty well. There's in the States we have the Virtual Technology Users Group, which has some presence in the East Coast, West Coast, and in the Midwest as well. And that again, we're building on that a community of users that get together, not to talk about any one vendor per se, but to come together as technologists and discuss you know, whatever we have a need for, bringing in keynote speakers and architects from all the various vendors or from the actual users themselves. And I think that is just some of the benefits of finding and working with the community. There are forums online like vBeers or even the vBrownbag. I mean, you know, 10 years ago we didn't have this kind of forum to go ahead and communicate with others globally, and I mean, consider ourselves lucky today. It's just so easy to find people of like minds to share your ideas with or bounce questions off of.
Yep. Oh, there is one other thing. I'm going to give a plug for a professor that I know through the Unix Association. His name is Alva Couch, and he focuses on computer science at Tufts University. But he also does work with like the LISA conference and other conferences focused around the craft of system administration and architecture design. So I'm not sure if people get a chance to see him speak. I think they'll learn a lot from some of the stuff that he covers, because I don't know of too many professors that take systems engineering but apply it to computer infrastructure as well.
Yeah, so that actually touches on the last subject that I wanted to just discuss with you. Was I think at the moment one of the big weaknesses with infrastructure architecture design, at least it's definitely very industry-based and vendor-focused, depending on which vendor's technology you embrace or are familiar with. As far as vendor-agnostic courses and working towards a degree or a master's degree or a PhD, I'm not aware of anything out there. So the Tufts University that you just mentioned, that to me is probably the first one that I've heard that has an actual formal education process. Are there any others that you're aware of? And
I do know that it's in the trade schools. So in many cases, they're labeled as colleges or community colleges. There seems to be more focus on I'll say the IT considerations versus the university. So university more on kind of the theoretical and the science level. But there are conferences where they bridge. And there are areas where you'll have somebody who's focused on research in one area talking about something that leads to the next jump in technology. If we go back to, for example, VMware, that got started with a project called Disco. You can probably guess what decade that was created, but Mendel Rosenblum had actually worked with a number of the other people on his team. I believe Ed Young, Ed Wang, and a few others were working on a way to solve problems within a computer infrastructure or within a computer system, but without actually having to have the computer. How do they simulate different things, failures and performance or degradation, things like that? This is where I started seeing a crossover between industry and academia. And so that's one of the things that Unix does. The ACM does this. IEEE does this as well. But there are several others in other regions of the world. Those are the three that I know that have global presence, but I'm sure there are plenty of other ones as well. It's just something that I think needs to happen. The first, I should say, the first course that was created at VMware around infrastructure design was one that I worked on last year, and it was called the VCDX Fast Track. I'm not so happy with the name. We were just kind of forced into that based on timing, but the idea is let's get started in having both the vendors and academia come up with courses. The vendors can focus on vendor-specific details, which are tied to the physical architecture. The universities may be able to go all the way from conceptual to physical. I think it's a matter of timing for many of the vendors, but I do see that evolving as we go forward.
Is it also worth for architects to So I know that VMware's design methodology and Cisco's design methodology is based on the TACPEN framework. You also have the TOGA reference architecture out there. It makes sense to use those course materials and certification programs to help to evolve your skills. Is that a valid path to go down?
It does work. The way that I would recommend looking at those is looking at the outline of the material and the person who's actually teaching, and look at some of the exercises that they'll actually cover, because there are the official ones from the organizations that develop the frameworks. There are other people that create stuff that complement them. The one thing that I want to be careful about is making sure that if somebody is going to go through those frameworks or those methodologies, does it apply to the technology space that they're in as well today. In many cases, all of them can apply, but there may be some things that are focused more on a particular area, for example, networking versus one that covers networking, storage, and compute.
Great.
That's pretty well said.
Well, that was an excellent discussion. So that's the end of all my questions. Greg?
Yeah, no, I think you got them. I mean, I don't want to also, we've hit the hour mark. I don't want to keep people too long. Guys, that was awesome. I know we've also got next week, you guys are back on following through with more around your book and maybe going a bit more in depth on it.
If I could, let me tell you what my thought is, and then if you guys agree, we'll make that as the plan of action. There's a session that I gave at the Forum Conference in Singapore back in January of this year, and it was on developing the design document set when you're developing an infrastructure. And that's something that went very well. It fits within about 45 minutes or so. So if you're game on doing that, I can run through that, and I think that will give people insight on, does their design include the things that, from a VCDX program or for the system and integration standpoint, does it have all these different things? We want to give people new ideas or confirm the ideas that they already have to help them move forward and be successful.
Yeah, that sounds good to me. I mean, I know, as also Renee was lighting on, I think for a lot of people, and from what I've spoken to people about, them looking at doing VCDX, for example, people aren't sure what is within an architecture design. It's hard to find examples of that kind of stuff. So I'm sure that would be massively popular. We can
include examples as part of that. I think it would be very useful. We had, I think, about 900 people, or sorry, 600 people all together for 3 different sessions that we did in Singapore, and they all liked it, even the ones that weren't pursuing VCDX, because they understood what do they need to think about, what are the things that they might be missing when they work with an architect, and so it allows the admin to help keep the architect honest.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. I think, yeah, that sounds perfect for next week.
And one last question. With your book, when do you think it will be ready and be on shelves so that people can start buying it?
We can guarantee it will be out before VMworld. Our goal is to try and have it completed in the May-June timeframe. We're just finalizing the last of the details. We were trying to work with one particular publisher. We're probably going to take the route that Duncan and Frank did and do this through Amazon CreateSpace, so we can get a Kindle version as well as a printed version. And so we're going to
so the electronic, you will have an electronic version that people can buy. Yeah, great, yes. Perfect. Yeah. And at VMworld, you'll have signing sessions and all that kind of stuff as well.
You know what? I will make it a promise to be at VMworld and make myself available for that, John.
Yep, very cool, very cool. Yeah,
I hope so.
Right now, Raj, definitely, who runs the bookstore, has already committed to supporting new books as well, so we'll definitely plan on having those there.
Brilliant.
Sounds great.
Yes, thanks guys for coming on. I'm looking forward to next week, actually. That sounds really, really helpful. And yeah, thanks everybody for joining. This has been recorded, so I'll try to get the recording up as soon as possible for everybody. And yeah, John and Mark and Renee, thanks for coming on and yeah, chatting with us, answering questions. And yeah, we'll chat to you guys all next week.
See you next week, and thanks for
Thank you
letting
very much.
everyone out.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.